The Sound of Damian Wayne. Written by Magnoliabee. Read to you by Evie is Evil. Chapter 12. He entered the dining room as quietly as he could. Alfred had laid out the sort of breakfast normally reserved for American movies, with ungrateful teens merely stuffing a slice of toast in their mouth as they rushed out the door, somehow always late. He wasn't hungry. His stomach ached and his head hurt. However, Damian was not one to be tardy, and it was also a Saturday, so there was no reason for anyone to be rushing off. Steph and Tim were already present. This surprised Damian, as he would have thought they'd be more tired, and therefore inclined to sleep in. He hadn't heard Tim shuffle into his room that night. Damian had finally managed to fall asleep after tossing and turning on his bruising. He slipped into his seat, beside Steph, who granted him a cheery good morning, hunching into himself ever so slightly. His eyes were thankfully not red from his childish outburst the night before. Still, he kept them down out of habit, only glancing up periodically when he thought they weren't looking. Steph was trying to pour orange juice into a glass, but kept splashing it accidentally. Tim had an exasperated look on his face, as if he weren't quite sure whether to be amused or annoyed at her antics. They weren't looking at him, and that was preferred for the time being. He didn't want more unwanted attention. He couldn't imagine the shame he'd feel if Jason or his father shared their conversations with Damian with the others. There was a burning sensation on his neck, and he looked up to see Cass behind him with a sharp glint in her eyes. He quickly turned away, heat warming up his face as the piece of toast before him suddenly gained his full attention. She walked around the table, finally sitting across from him, right next to Tim. Her stare hadn't let up, a frown growing deeper by the second on her face. He squirmed in his chair, wondering if it might be worth it to just bolt out of his room to avoid this interaction. "Cass, how'd you sleep?" Steph had managed to pour her cup, and was now helping herself to a formidable portion of pancakes. She dumped whipped cream, and Damian scrunched his nose in disgust as he watched this unfold beside him. "Good," Cass replied, her stare unwavering. Damian was feeling increasingly uncomfortable at her scrutiny. It seemed the other two had taken notice, as they were glancing awkwardly at one another. Damian knew all too well that if he were to speak, she'd notice his pain right away, no matter how much he tried to mask it. "Right, same here." Steph glanced at Damian, as if she might be able to glean what exactly Cass was focusing on. He tried to sit straight up, not caring for the accompanying burn of his bruises as he adjusted his posture. The more normal he looked, the better. "Do I have a partner tonight? Patrol sucked yesterday." Steph turned back towards Tim, who shrugged.
"Ask Bruce. Cass and I are still looking into that fire. We found some more herbs thrown around there, so that could be a lead."
He leaned back in his chair, and Damian glanced up, hanging on to his every word.
"There's no suspect yet. The guys Gordon interrogated had no clues. They didn't even seem to have much of an idea of why they kidnapped Damian and me in the first place. It's weird."
"How the hell do they not know why they kidnapped you guys?"
Steph stabbed into her waffle aggressively with her fork.
"That's not exactly something you do by accident."
Tim lowered his voice.
"Personally, I have my bets on magic being involved somehow. It's looking more and more likely either way. Random energy surges, creepy piles of burning herbs, confused kidnappers. It starts adding up. The cult idea doesn't sound too far-fetched either. A group doing this would make sense."
"And what? We just haven't seen or heard about this mystery group? How's that even possible? They're clearly not that stealthy."
"Right. It's all theories anyway. Nothing definitive. Zatanna's busy right now, so Bruce has been trying to contact Constantine. Apparently, he's missing."
"He's probably in hell again."
"Maybe. He apparently was in Boston for a case he took, and now he's basically disappeared."
"So he was in hell?"
Tim raised a brow with a slight grin as he swirled his cup of tea around with his spoon. The honey he'd been stirring in long dissolved.
"We'll keep an eye on it anyway."
Damian stiffened as they spoke.
Magic was not a word he thought he could be so grateful to hear, but it rang out like thunder in the distance, the approaching truth lighting up his hopes. He had no answers for his predicament. It might have been better if they somehow figured out at least that there was a witch loose. Then she could be caught, and hopefully reverse her magic. It wasn't a well-thought-out plan by any means, but he clung on to it all the same. Trepidation rippled down him in mounting waves, gnawing at him. He had to ignore the lingering fear of his family, realizing how pathetic he had been to let a mere magic user curse him, or his incapability at finding loopholes. He tried many, of course, from mouthing words to Tim over the dinner table and trying to shout about the witch, no care for the pain. It felt like his throat closed up whenever he attempted to mention her.
Damian,
Cass began, and Damian felt his stomach reel.
how are you?
He felt sweat begin to form on his forehead. The seconds ticked away as he opened his mouth, dread setting in with the intensity of Cass's stare. Just as he was about to croak out a shaky reply, a lifeline appeared in the form of Titus. The dog dashed into the room, a leash in his mouth, and he dropped it and barked excitedly. He circled the table, nosing at Damian's pant legs. He turned his attention to Titus, ever glad for his loyalty. Titus knew better than to act like this, and yet he was causing a ruckus, almost as if he understood that was what Damian needed.
I think your dog wants something.
Steph laughed, snaking her hand around Damian's chair to pet Titus, who barked happily.
Maybe you should take him out.
Damian pushed his chair out with an uncharacteristic smile. He walked away, the gentle sound of paws padding behind him. He just prayed Cass wouldn't follow. As he finally stepped outside into the manor's enormous property, he didn't recognize the pain in his chest as he glanced behind him to see no one was there. Titus wagged his tail as he bounded in front of Damian. They trailed further into the gardens that surrounded the back of the manor. He tried to ignore the throbbing in his head that kept getting worse. This made it difficult, as the only thing to distract him was the ongoing pain in his stomach. It only worsened since his short stint at the breakfast table, and had seemingly begun to crescendo as he neared the far corner of the property. A large tree stood at the outskirts of the manor. Its trunk had a small carving that Alfred had once shown him. It was the simple letters of M plus T, and he liked to imagine sometimes his grandparents doing it on an autumn day just like this one. It housed birds in the spring. It seemed one had left behind a rather large nest buried in the branches near the top of the tree. A jolt of pain echoed in his abdomen as his throat suddenly felt like it was an arid desert. He doubled over, clutching his stomach before darting to a bush and throwing up unceremoniously. Titus barked roughly beside him, making for an all-around unpleasant experience as he felt his senses being attacked. He let out a groan as he shakily stood up, his ailments fading away. His bruises still ached, of course, but the throbbing in his head and stomach had subsided. He glanced down in dampened horror as he realized he'd thrown up the same black and syrupy substance that had dripped from his nose earlier in the week. It seemed the expulsion of the substance made his symptoms lessen. His head didn't ache nearly as much, and a feeling of mangled relief flushed over him. His condition was obviously worsening, but he was just grateful it didn't hurt quite as much to simply exist. Damian picked at the loose threading in his suit. He needed to get it mended, but hadn't been able to have that happen for certain reasons. In some ways, he was currently thankful that it remained broken, as that gave him something to look at, as Dick kept glancing at him. Kind of cold for October, am I right? I mean, obviously it's Gotham, so it gets cold, but even for this time of year... He trailed off as Damian continued to ignore him. He hadn't thought Dick would ever need to resort to such idle topics as the weather to converse with him. Dick sighed and Damian looked away. The city's downtown lights were dim from where they were. Father had them patrolling away from where Damian and Jason had gone the night before. Instead, to a different location,
near the central fire station. They were all searching for more information on the power surges. So far, they hadn't gotten anywhere, with Barbara uncertain of what sort of reason a person might have for burning the incense piles. She mentioned she was planning to comb through Gotham's library to look for any clues. He supposed that the plan was sound. He hoped it might yield more clues than his attempts in the Manor's library. The damaged book remained burned in his mind.
"How's school?"
Dick asked suddenly. Damian shrugged in response. Even with words, there'd never be enough time to explain all the daily irritants, from Cody to Mrs. Briggs, to even sometimes Dr. Dahlman. Though, admittedly, he sometimes did find comfort in their quiet meetings. He figured that was the point of a counselor.
"Do you not want to talk?"
The question startled him. He stared at Dick, who had a pained look in his eyes, poorly masked with casualness. He didn't know what his answer might be. Damian couldn't talk, and so it wasn't a matter of choice whether he did so or not. Of course, he'd be able to after they caught the witch. It would go back to normal, because if he could talk, then he would. Right?
"Damian? Damian."
Dick's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. His brother looked downright worried. He opened his mouth like he wanted to press him further, ask more questions he'd get no answers to. However, the smell of smoke caught their attention, and they both turned to observe as electricity crackled from a nearby utility pole in brilliant arcs. Dick cursed as they both shielded their eyes. The line exploded in much the same way as the billboard had before. It sparked and sputtered, dying melodramatically as the lights on the nearby city blocks turned off.
"You okay?"
Dick asked, fumbling around as their masks adjusted to the sudden lack of light. From what Damian could make out, his figure looked tense, and he thought it best to answer. "Yes," he replied, and he was grateful for the shield of the night, as his back flared at a pain sharper than he'd experienced yet. Damian bit his lip. He muffled his cry with a harsh cough, wiping his mouth as blood softly dripped. It was so unexpectedly painful that all he could do was rub his back, as if that'd stop a bruise from forming.
"Good. Okay."
His mask finally adjusted to the darkness, and Damian watched as Dick unmuted his comm.
"Hey, a power line just exploded by Robin and me. It seems like one of those power surges."
"Did you see anything weird?" Tim's voice cut in.
"Nothing out of the ordinary. It's only a couple of blocks around here that are out."
"Split up and scout out the area. Don't interact if you see anything. Just report it for backup,"
Bruce ordered.
"Copy that."
Dick muted his comms once again. He turned his attention back to Damian, grimacing slightly.
"I'll take the first 3 blocks. You take the other 2. You have to say something if you see anything, okay?"
He was staring at Damian, as if he didn't trust him. All he could do was nod in response, not daring to risk further injury. He grappled down, an eerie feeling setting over him as he scoured the alleys and rooftops. The line exploding right in front of them couldn't have been a good sign by any means. He'd been attracting trouble as of late, in more ways than one, it would seem. The feeling of dread didn't lessen as he neared the farthest stretch of his given route. In fact, it had only picked up a growing storm as he rounded the corner of an alleyway. A headache began once more, similar to the one he'd had earlier that day. A strong sense of déjà vu washed over him as he made eye contact with Melina. She was standing still, clutching her satchel tight to her body. She didn't seem exactly startled, as if she were expecting his arrival, but the bravado she had displayed on their last meeting had disappeared. Her face was even gaunter than before, and he observed her collarbone jutting out from under her shirt. It made her hair look even more all-encompassing, framing her pallid face as she looked at him with all the fascination that an inventor might have for their monstrous creation.
"You,"
she murmured, as if she was reminding herself.
"What have you done?"
He stepped backward on instinct. She didn't seem to notice or care as she came closer. It felt like he was rooted in place, unable to do anything but stand and wait. She squinted at him, frowning. I've been feeling it, you know. You're seeping away my power. How are you doing that? I thought you were human. Melina bent down, the scent of cheap perfume hitting him. All I did was give you a little curse so you couldn't blab. She reeled back, as if she'd been burned. Her eyes scanned him like she could see right through his armor to the mottled sight underneath. What's wrong with you? Damian's breaths were unsteady, nerves suddenly racing. He wasn't afraid of her, and yet he'd never felt so on edge. Jesus! Her expression morphed once more, a look of horror evident in the downturn of her lips and the creases on her forehead. Hold on, this shouldn't hurt. She thrust her hands forward. He instinctively tried to step back, raising an arm to cover his face. He felt pulled forward slightly and lowered his forearm minutely. It was with a jumble of emotions that he watched as a bright light pooled out of his chest. It was a gentle and luminescent river. His headache lessened in much the same way as when he'd expelled Nacentra, diminishing to a dull throbbing. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, as she finally tore her hands away, like she was afraid to touch him. That's not good. He told me that it wouldn't actually hurt you. I thought it might pinch, or you'd just be quiet. It sounded like she was trying to convince herself of something. It was hard to discern what exactly that may be, but Damian latched on to this unknown he that she spoke of. That's not what I wanted. To his utter shock, she seemed close to tears. She was obviously unstable, even more so than the night they'd first crossed paths. I don't want to hurt people. Damian had many doubts associated with her assertion, mainly the fact that he'd observed her freezing individuals in place before, while his father had mentioned offhandedly the next day they had become unfrozen, swiftly. The intent was still there. He pointed to the satchel on her side. It held the same book, no doubt. She could use it to reverse the spell, if it was truly weighing on her conscience so much. She sniffled. It'll just be less than a month, and I'll reverse it. I promise. But I can't. Not yet. I promised her that. I'm sorry. Again, she referenced people he most certainly did not know, and she didn't seem so keen on expounding on who they might be. God, you're a kid. What am I doing? Oh, God. She cut herself off as Damian's calm echoed in the small alleyway.
Robin, I finished my area. Did you find anything?
Dick sounded slightly nervous, as if he were expecting something to have gone wrong. Damian stared Melina down with all the hate in his heart. He mustered up the courage to speak, just as her eyes widened in fear. No. He muted the calm just as he said it, and there was a sick satisfaction as his whine of pain was mirrored by her own cry. He held his side, not needing to play up the pain as she squirmed before him. It was with a sadistic satisfaction that he listened to her voice cracking, flooding out apologies. That feeling faded away, though, as he finally glanced up at her. He would have thought he'd be happy in some ways that she was sorry for what she'd done, or at the least slightly pleased that someone cared about everything that happened. But he only felt sick as she wiped at her eyes, still mumbling to herself. The pity didn't feel good. He felt undeserving of it, even when it came from someone like her. I really am sorry. She said something in a language he didn't understand, before humming to herself. It was a sweet tune, like a lullaby. It seemed to comfort her somehow. He couldn't do anything but watch warily. She was too volatile to try and apprehend her. For where if thou roam, thy home shall be near. She sang softly. It seemed to mark the end of her song. A faint smile appeared on her face. She opened up her book finally, trailing a weak hand through the pages, till she landed on one that made her pause. With one last mournful look, she cast her spell and dissipated in a fog. It was like she'd never been there. It was hard to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. Monday came far too soon for Damian's liking. It crept up, much like it always did. He was reminded of the orange cartoon cat that Dick had shown him when he was trying to teach him American pop culture. He liked the comic to a degree. Animals always appealed to him. His math class did not need much attention. They tested him into algebra. Father hadn't wanted him taking college classes in middle school, which meant he was with the older students. He breezed through every test and assignment with ease, usually. Multiplying out fractions for questions was child's play for him. He couldn't say that was the case for some of his 8th grade classmates.
"What do we do again?"
Damian glanced over to his peer, who was staring at the paper with squinted eyes.
"Why are there letters in math? I hate English."
She peeked over at Damian's paper, which was entirely blank.
"You don't get it either? Low-key, that makes me feel better, 'cause you're a genius and stuff."
He ignored her, instead staring up at the clock. It was nearing the end of the period. That wasn't as good as a sight as it should have been. The problem was, he had PE next. The class had its ups and downs. Usually, the ups were illustrated by watching Cody and Annabelle fight, while the downs were instances where he got in the middle of their quarrels. He didn't enjoy being called on to back one of the two up. The dodgeball incident was a perfect example of why he disliked dealing with his childish peers. And these were all of the issues he'd had with the class before being cursed. His mind wandered back to Saturday, the night of that particular patrol. The witch had clearly been at fault for the electrical incidents. Dick had managed to find another pile of burning herbs. Damian guessed this must have been part of some spell that Merlina was casting. She'd mentioned that she'd reversed the curse in less than a month, a figure spelling certain doom for Gotham, surely. It was apparent she had some sort of magic planned for that time frame. He recalled she had also noted he'd been seeping away some of her magic somehow. He guessed that might have been why he'd been so under the weather, but was at a loss for how she had managed to cast a curse she seemingly had no real understanding of. The mentioning of other potential adversaries had shaken him. The witch had noted a he and a she. Who they were remained as mysterious as the spellbook itself. The bell rang, and he begrudgingly packed his stuff up, slowly trekking over to the locker room. He would prefer not to change in front of his classmates, choosing his usual method of hiding in the bathroom stall instead. He glanced at the mirror, taking in his appearance. It was different from what it had been. His under eyes were darker than usual, his frame slightly thinner. He looked under the weather at most, but he knew his shirt hid a different tale. Damian entered the gym to see most of his classmates had already arrived. Mr. Baker had them sit on the bleachers in order of last name, and unfortunately, as a Wayne, that meant he sat next to Annabelle Whitman, with Cody Mills right behind them. He internally sighed, placing himself in his assigned spot with annoyance. Annabelle kept glancing at him, no doubt still thinking about the dodgeball she'd rocketed at his face. A sharp whistle cut through the chatter, and silence settled over the gym.
"All right, guys, let's try and settle down so we can get through the class."
Mr. Baker had a firm grip on his clipboard. He seemed a bit out of shape to be teaching athletics, in Damian's opinion.
"We're playing 4-on-4 basketball. I'm separating you all by counting off. I don't want any injuries this time around. Got it?"
There was a round of snickering as his classmates all looked over to him and Annabelle, whose face looked flushed under the scrutiny of their peers.
"Okay, enough. Sit still. I'm not putting you with your friends, so don't try to move spots."
He counted them off by 8. It was to Damian's horror that he was given 6, the same as Cody behind him. It seemed practically impossible to avoid the boy. He glanced backward to see Cody grinning widely.
Yo, awesome! This team is stacked as hell.
Damian scoffed as he looked forward. He debated simply hiding in the locker room, but knew it would be fruitless. Clearly, his absence would be noted. Mr. Baker assigned them a court and informed them that even-numbered teams would have to wear pennies. His teammates whined, a girl asking if she could just grab her pink hoodie from her locker. This suggestion was shot down very soundly. Damian pulled the red garment on in disgust. It had a certain scent only middle schoolers could give off, a mix of strong deodorant and sweat. It looked ridiculous over his school-issued hoodie.
Okay, team, let's huddle,
Cody began, gesturing the group toward him.
We're gonna destroy them, and I'm gonna dunk on Annabelle.
Damian found this doubtful, seeing as the boy was 5 foot on a good day. Sadly, he couldn't make any comments. Thankfully, it seemed the girl with the pink hoodie in her locker had similar thoughts.
She's like 4 inches taller than you. You can't even touch the rim. Who? Annabelle, I said she's tall. Asked.
A noise of outrage was emitted from the girl as Cody elbowed his friend, the two boys laughing at a decidedly moronic comeback. Damian grabbed a basketball from where Mr. Baker had set them out. It was a bit oversized for the average middle schooler, but Damian knew how to make sure his grip was firm. They assembled on the court, the bright gym lights shining down on them. Mr. Baker blew his whistle, and the game commenced. Damian stood back where he could, letting his teammates charge forward. It was easy enough to purposefully be out of the way, ensuring no passes were made to him. He pretended to guard a player once in a while, but overall managed to avoid getting too much playtime. Annabelle and Cody remained as competitive as ever, blocking each other and arguing over fouls. Damian looked the other way when she stuck her foot out to trip Cody, the resulting crash music to his ears. Overall, it wasn't nearly as bad as he feared it might be. Their team, of course, ended up losing, but he didn't exactly put much emphasis on the importance of winning PE basketball games. He thus had his guard down when Mr. Baker ordered Cody and him to go put the pennies and basketballs away.
He said to put them by the lacrosse sticks. I think that's over there,
Cody said as he rifled through the storage. Damian didn't understand what compelled Mr. Baker to trust him, of all people, to undertake this task, but he supposed the supervision Damian supplied could ensure the chore was completed. He looked down, noticing he still had his red penny on. He grumbled to himself, pulling it off more harshly than he would have intended to. It caused his hoodie and shirt to ride up somewhat. The sensation of the cold blow of air conditioning on his back was somehow painful on his bruising. A short intake of breath behind him caused him to yank his hoodie down once more, turning around quickly.
What happened?
Cody looked sick behind him, his eyes wide.
That doesn't look good,
he finished lamely. Damian's throat tightened, unmoving as he stared his classmate down. It was like a standoff, neither willing to back down nor to speak. He felt the blood slowly leave his face, a fear setting over him much stronger than what even Melina had given him. His chest hurt, and he massaged his sternum absentmindedly, eyes glued to Cody.
That's bad. You should tell somebody,
Cody babbled, obviously not knowing what to say.
How did that even happen? It kind of looks like...
He trailed off as Damian's breathing became more labored. Cody looked scared before him, without the usual confidence that he carried with ease. Damian had caused that shift. More pressingly, he feared whom he might tell. If the word might reach his family. What would they say? What might they think? That he was foolish and as much of a child as they always claimed him to be? Or how horrific his mistake was, after all. Melina knew his identity. The rest of their vigilante forms weren't too hard to conjure up from just that. He hadn't gotten much further than they had in their investigations. Not that it would matter. He wouldn't even be able to tell them anything. It was with fervor that he shoved the rest of the pennies in Cody's limp arms, dashing out with shallow breaths. He changed quickly, stuffing his things into his bag. The halls were crowded and suffocating, and he found his steps taking him upstairs. He neared Miss Liesel's room, where a supply closet was. Damian slipped inside, leaving the door open a crack so he could see someone approaching. It was still possible that Cody might not say a word, but he couldn't compose himself. One missed science class was a small price to pay for his sanity. He listened to nothing and everything. Footsteps quieted, and the muffled sounds of classes surrounded him. His hideout was grounding in a way, and he cherished that reality, letting it fester as he let silence wash over him, with a comfort he wasn't used to from the state. He wasn't certain how many minutes had passed. Time had felt like it was at a standstill. The clacking of shoes neared his lair. He heard them pause, and a glistening black nose stuck itself into the doorway, the mass of fur behind it casting a shadow on him. A hand stuck into the doorway, and Damian looked up.
Damian?
Dr. Dalmond asked, with a confused and worried expression on his face. And that is the end of Chapter 12. Author's Notes. Oh yes, what we have all been waiting for finally arrives. I know it took a while, but yay! Finally a change. Fun starts now. Hopefully the pacing has been palatable so far. Sorry this took so long. I got sick. Working with kids is not good for the immune system. My birthday is today, the 9th, so it's kind of my present to myself, I guess. Haha. But I went to the LA Comic-Con, and that was really cool. Kinda blew the bank on Damian merch, though, I can't lie. Also, if you don't know what a penny is, it's usually... Penny is? It's just a usually mesh basketball jersey that people sometimes have to wear in American PE classes to differentiate themselves in class sports teams. I really struggle saying that. Penny. It's a silly word. I just call it a penny, and then I get penny. Yeah. It's not spelled penny like the coin, but I think it's pronounced that way. I'm not sure. Reader's notes.
I sang? Oh my gosh.
I wasn't expecting that. That was just on the spot. This is the first time. Not first. Why am I saying first? I'm feeling like really refreshed with this story now after reading this chapter. I felt good reading this chapter today. I felt into it. I feel like it's been like 2 months since I've really been into it. It's chapter 11, the last chapter. I was like struggling to actually read that chapter, and I wasn't feeling good reading it. The Constantine chapter, I kind of didn't want to read it. It wasn't piquing my interest, so that one I had put off for a while. It's been like well over a month since I like properly enjoyed this story, if I'm being honest. But I'm really excited, and now you guys have to wait. Because I know this is coming up, and then it's going to be a month before you see the next chapter after this. Which I feel bad, because I feel like I'm leaving y'all on a cliffhanger. But that's how the wind blows, my friends. Yeah. It's going to be like a month for this one, and then schedule should return, and you'll get these every 2 weeks. Chapter 12. At this current point, there are 16 chapters out, so I'm pretty soon going to catch up, and I'll just update as Magnoliabee updates. Yay! Yippee! Anyways, thank you guys for listening, and bye!